This week on Forward.
Look, the entire rationale of Joe Biden's run is that he was able to reassemble the blue wall, which was destroyed by Trump in 2016, that in 2020, Joe Biden can put it together. If we demonstrate how weak he really is in this state and other states in the blue wall, the entire rationale for his campaign evaporates. I mean, I'm not looking to hurt the party.
We're trying to help the party here. We're trying to save the party from itself at this point.
Yes,
Jeff.
exactly. It's going to become a sort of coastal bourgeois party that has no working class members in it, and that would be a really terrible party to be in, frankly.
It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Senior Advisor to the Dean Phillips campaign, Bernie Sanders, campaign manager in 2016 and advisor in 2020, former head of Our Revolution. This man has done a lot. Jeff Weaver, welcome, Jeff.
Great. Hey, thanks for having me, Andrew. Appreciate it.
So, Jeff, you are a longtime political professional. You were Bernie's OG independent gubernatorial campaign manager, I believe. You might have been his chief of staff after he was in the House and then the Senate. How did you react when Bernie came to you about him running for president in 2016?
Yeah. Well, that's a great story because I had left his office in 2009. I had ran his Senate campaign in 2006. I was a Senate chief of staff for a couple of years, and I spent a number of years on the House side as well as chief of staff. And I was just wanted a little break from politics. So I left politics and opened up my comic book business and was having fun with that. And then 2015, Bernie called me out of the blue. He's not one to call you much. And said, Jeff, would you like to have dinner? I was like, oh, something's up. So I went and had dinner with Bernie, and he was let's say, taken aback by the cost of everything, the Washington consultant class. And he wanted somebody who he knew was his guy in his corner to make sure that his campaign wasn't being looted. He said to me, he says, everything costs $30,000 a month here in Washington. This one, that one, this consultant, that consultant. So anyway, that's how it happened.
Well, that was a rousing campaign. I thought you guys should have won, honestly.
Well, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. And I dare say if Bernie had been the nominee in 2016, I think Bernie beats Trump. I think there is no Trump won.
That's right.
And then here we are about to see Trump too. And history is almost repeating itself where you're like, who's going to beat Trump? Dean Phillips. Who's not going to beat Trump? Joe Biden, which, by the way, that's my feeling on all of this. So how did you react when Dean Phillips called you much more recently?
Yeah, well, I like you, I've had some serious doubts about whether the president could beat Donald Trump. But there was nobody out there running, as you well know. And as we know now, Dean Phillips tried to get a bunch of other people to run before ultimately throwing his own hat into the ring to provide folks an alternative. But it was an interesting conversation. He's obviously positioned himself aesthetically as a centrist. If you look at his voting record, he has a solid Democratic voting record. Voted for the entire agenda in the first 2 years of the administration. And we talked about Medicare for All, which he told me that he had been looking to adopt. We talked about free tuition at public colleges and universities. We talked about a number of issues that are important to advance, and there was nobody else willing to carry the banner this time. And getting to know Dean Phillips, incredibly charismatic guy, at heart a really very decent person, a nice person, which is a little bit rare in politics, as we all know.
He's a very nice person. I agree.
He is. Maybe too nice for this game.
Well, one of the things I say is you don't think he's going to be it because he's so congenial, but he has the potential to be the most transformative political figure in quite some time. Yeah. Because he's going to try and break the shackles of the duopoly.
Well, I mean, you can imagine if a former businessman who's positioned himself as a centrist ultimately becomes the one to bring Medicare for all to the country. It would be a little ironic, but this is what happens, for those of us who've been in the progressive fields toiling for years and years, the issues that, Bernie talked about and others have talked about have become more mainstream. And it is only logical that as those issues become mainstream, a broader and broader range of political leaders will talk about those issues and champion those issues. And that's what victory means. When you have an issue agenda as opposed to a cult of personality, that's what it means. And, that's what Bernie was about, was trying to advance a series of an issue set to move the country forward.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yes, you,
So,
yes, you can.
so Dean does say that he thinks there's a very compelling centrist and business case for universal healthcare, which I totally agree with. By the way, I mean it's breaking the backs of small businesses. It's increasing the cost of everything because you just have these climbing insurance premiums, and then you pass them along to customers in various ways. It locks up the workforce because a lot of people feel like they can't leave or else they're going
That's
to lose
right.
their insurance. So that there are all of these problems that arise from our current healthcare system. So there's a very compelling business case for it. Okay, so you sit down with Dean, you say, "Wow, this is a nice guy. Wow, he's actually going to champion some things that I feel very, very strongly about." But you're a professional, and so you say, "Okay, how the heck is this guy going to win?" And this conversation is going to be released to the public on February 5th. So South Carolina will have voted. Both of us would be stunned if that was somehow some like crazy Dean
Very stunned. Yes, very stunned.
Dean showing. But
We'll re-record if that happens.
yeah, sure. I'd be very happy to. It'd be my pleasure. But both of us think that the major opportunity is in Michigan in February on February 27th, and we think it's kind of a huge opportunity.
Yes, no, it is definitely a huge opportunity, and people will remember that Bernie won Michigan in 2006.
You mean 2016?
16, I mean 2016. Sorry, I lost 10 years there somewhere. In 2016, in a surprise upset. Michigan is a sort of microcosm of America. Everybody thinks about it as just blue collar auto industry, which it is obviously, and they think of Detroit, as it's really the only city there. Interestingly, there are more African Americans in Michigan than there are in South Carolina, even though we think of South Carolina as the African American primary. But there are also small cities, there are rural areas. And in 2016, Bernie traveled all of them. And I think Dean will do the same thing. Folks up there really respond to they haven't had a lot of retail politics. So if you are somebody who can practice retail politics well, as Dean can, as we saw in New Hampshire, I think he's going to do really well there. He's going to spark a lot of interest with folks. It is an open primary. They don't have party registration in Michigan, so literally anybody who's registered to vote can come out and vote for Dean, which creates a much bigger pool of voters. New Hampshire typically has a lot of independent voters, which it did this time, but they all flocked into the Republican primary to vote for Nikki Haley. There was a very well-funded effort on the part of Nikki Haley to get those independents into the Republican primary. So, it disadvantaged Dean in New Hampshire. But in Michigan, I think you're going to see a lot of independents and perhaps even some, former Christie voters or folks like that who might come over and vote for Dean in the Democratic primary.
Hey all, if you know me, you know I'm not that handy in the kitchen, and I have become a huge believer and booster of Factor. Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals make eating a joy. It's so fast, you just pop that thing 2 minutes later, and you are eating a restaurant-quality, healthy meal, making you feel excellent about yourself. My favorite is the turkey chili with zucchini, and there is so much more to choose from. You never get tired of it. It fits any budget. It's fast, healthy. It is going to be the new Factor in your life. Yes, I'm a fan. Head to factormeals.com/yang50 and use code yang50 to get 50% off your first box and 2 free wellness shots per box while subscription is active. That's code yang50 at factormeals.com/yang50 to get 50% off your first box. Get Factor today. It's going to change the way you eat.
Yeah, so by the numbers, the New Hampshire Republican primary drew 315,000 voters, and the Democratic primary, such as it was, drew 110,000. So
Right.
if you can imagine, let's call it 100,000 of those independents voting in the Dean versus Biden primary, I bet Dean would have gotten most of those votes. And then you can see him getting 40, 45, even winning that thing. But if you were in New Hampshire, as we were, all you got bombarded by was Nikki Haley versus Trump ads. And so you'd think, well, that's where the action is. And so that's where all the independents voted. Now, in Michigan, February 27, the odds are very, very high that Dean versus Biden is the only game in town.
Yes.
because the Republican South Carolina primary is on February 24th, and Nikki Haley will almost assuredly lose very significantly. And it's going to be tough for her to lose her home state by whatever the number is, 18 points, and then say, on, where are you going? So,
let's go, Michigan, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a chance that she drops out before Feb 24. There's a very high chance that she drops out on February 24. And then Dean might have the field all to himself in the primary against Joe Biden in a state that Joe Biden is struggling in. A poll came out recently that had Joe Biden losing to Trump by 8 points in the general. By the way, this is a state he won in 2020, so that's a big sign. Yeah. And then if you replaced Joe Biden with Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, all of a sudden Whitmer beats Trump by 4. So that's a 12-point swing. I agree with you that Dean is a very good fit for the state, being from Minnesota. I said he plays hockey and he's going to feel familiar. I mean, Minnesota doesn't quite touch Michigan, but it's a couple states over. So he's going to feel familiar.
He'll do well in the Upper Peninsula.
If he gets to the Upper Peninsula, he'll do well. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time in Michigan. I don't know if you know that, Jeff. Sounds like you have too, campaigning with Bernie.
Yes.
But I started an organization that held its training camp in Detroit. And I've been not just to Detroit, but around the state. It's good fun. I'll be there campaigning with and for Dean in February. So that's going to be a blast. And Joe Biden's particularly vulnerable, and this is going to be an interesting bridge building exercise for Dean, but the Arab American community has completely turned their back on Joe Biden in Michigan. It's a traditionally Democratic constituency, and they're essentially saying, look, none of us are going to vote for Joe. Some of them are flirting with Cornel West, but some of them want to find a more productive way to channel their energies. And if Dean can make that case to that population, that would be an enormous inroad.
No, it absolutely would. And Bernie did that in 2016. The Arab American community in Michigan was critical to his victory there. And it was one of the few communities where we had the support of the local business community, the local religious leaders, the local journalism folks. It was sort of like what Hillary had everywhere else. And I think Dean has the potential to build that kind of coalition in Michigan. You're right. The community is very, very upset with Joe Biden and the way he's handled the war. And Joe Biden has already canceled some visits there because there was fear that, he would be either poorly received or no one would show up at all. So there's a good opportunity to make inroads there. I mean, and you're right about the importance of this. Look, the entire rationale of Joe Biden's run is that he was able to reassemble the blue wall, which was destroyed by Trump in 2016. That in 2020, Joe Biden can put it together. Now, you and I have seen these polls in these battleground states. It's not just Michigan, obviously, Wisconsin and others, and Pennsylvania. If Joe Biden, if we demonstrate how weak he really is in this state and other states in the blue wall, the entire rationale for his campaign evaporates. Then it is, as he himself has says, there are 50 Democrats who could beat Donald Trump, and probably there are 50 Democrats who can do that. But Dean Phillips is the only one who has had the guts to actually step up and try to do it.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Please do hit like and subscribe and hit that bell if you want to be notified every time a new episode drops. Probably on Mondays, but hit that bell, and thank you. Yeah, on the list of Democrats who can defeat Donald Trump, in my opinion, Joe Biden's not on the list. Like there are 50, and then Joe Biden is somewhere, unfortunately below that level. Which is unfortunate, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I don't say that to insult the president. I mean, it's not a question of insulting the president, because I think by many metrics, his administration has been very successful. But if you just look, what polls are, is you're asking voters what they think. So when voters are telling you that they want someone else, and that's obviously true on the Republican side, they want somebody else besides Trump too. You should listen. And, we've heard from the administration, from the White House, 2 years ago, these polls were bad. And they said, well, it's 2 years out. Give it time. It's a long time in politics. Then it was 18 months. We're going to get it. Then it was a year. Now we're 9 months, 8 months out, and the polls are worse. The favorables are worse.
Yep.
And so it's not getting better. And no one has been able to point out what is going to be the magic moment when suddenly all of this reverses itself.
It's wild, man. I talk to traditional Democrats, and they feel like ostriches with their heads in the sand. And I say to them, look, if I were just to show you two candidates and just get rid of the names, like which candidate do you think is going to win and lose? It's just they can't accept a loss to Trump tribally. And so if I say, hey, Joe Biden's losing Michigan by 8, Joe Biden's losing Georgia by 8, both states he won. He's losing North Carolina by 9, and that was a state that he only lost by 1 last time. He's a 38% approval rating. He's 81 years old. Like you just put any of the polls up there, and you say this is like a really, really terrible approach. And they spent $25 million in Michigan and other states trying to buttress Joe's numbers because they sensed he was slipping, and it had no effect. They beat everyone over the head with a Bidenomics message to the tune of $25 million. By the way, a very, very aggressive / desperate move. Very early in the before the vote.
Yeah.
But that was a massive litmus test, in my opinion, that the message isn't going to hit. Like people, this is not ad campaign fixable. This isn't tweak something. And I've been a candidate. You actually have been a candidate, which was interesting to me looking at your history, Jeff.
We prefer not to talk about that, but go ahead.
But you've been around a candidate an awful lot. And you know what a candidate has to do? A candidate has to project energy, travel, convince people, do at least a little bit of retail politicking, at a minimum do friendly interviews. And I can sense right now that the Biden team is very, very nervous about him doing just about anything under the sun, which is a terrible recipe heading into a contest against Trump.
No, and as we were talking about earlier, and I think this is true, just as a practical matter, wouldn't you want to see Joe Biden debate in the primaries before he's going to be forced to debate in the general election? Trump is going to desperately want to debate him, and I don't know how you can go all the way to November without agreeing to debate your opponent in the other party. I mean, it will be impossible. So we should have an opportunity to see Joe Biden debate, for a couple hours on television, and then voters can make their assessment. The president is up to it, the president's not up to it. That's ultimately for the voters to decide. And what's happened too often in the Democratic Party is, that party insiders now are making all the decisions, and we've seen that with Dean being kept off the ballots in some of these states. And the result is that that they've lost a lot of white working class people, and now the polling is showing that working class Latinos, working class African Americans are starting to move out of the party, and that's a very, very dangerous situation. I mean, I'm not looking to hurt the party. In fact, quite the opposite.
We're trying to help the party here. We're trying to save the party from itself at this point.
Yes,
Jeff.
Exactly. It's going to become a sort of coastal bourgeois party that has no working class members in it, and that would be a really terrible party to be in, frankly.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is a little like walking your dog in public without a leash. Most of the time it might work out, but then that one time your dog could run away or get dog napped, it's better to take a little bit of care, especially when it's as simple as using ExpressVPN. When I log on to the internet, I just click on ExpressVPN and I get beamed on through an encrypted network, through a server someplace. I have no idea where it is, but then no one else does either. It's great. They can't track you, they can't buy and sell your data, it's secure, and you can get content from other parts of the world, so you can be kind of international and cosmopolitan. If that sounds good to you, right now you can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN free at expressvpn.com/yang. That's expressvpn.com/yang. expressvpn.com/yang.
It's Michigan, Feb 27. A number of things have to break in Dean's direction. So will he retail politic? Of course. Will he be successful? People like him? Yes. I mean, he'll be excellent at that. He does need some money behind him. Michigan is a big state, a much bigger state than New Hampshire. Yep. So the money.
I'll make a shameless plug right here. Go to Dean24.com and give us a $25 or $50 contribution. If you like Andrew Yang, if you like or hate Jeff Weaver, please consider giving us a small contribution to help the cause move forward.
Totally agree. Dean24.com. It's a small price to pay to potentially help preserve Western civilization. So you have Retail politicking, check. He'll get local media, check. We need to get some money in the door so that he can advertise in earnest, check. There'll be some national press opportunities.
For sure. And there's more coming. There was a real, as you know, during the New Hampshire primary, there was a real blackout of Dean Phillips. And so many people are going to be like, who's Dean Phillips? And you're going to say, who's Dean Phillips? Because, he was kept during the New Hampshire primary. He's basically kept off MSNBC, and I say basically, I mean totally kept off from
Totally.
MSNBC. CNN very, very, very little coverage. He started getting a little coverage on Fox after about the time of the primary, but the national media has largely ignored him. Meanwhile, they're giving all kinds of coverage to Republican candidates, Ramaswamy and Christie and others, all of who were languishing in single digits. While ignoring Dean Phillips. And so that's turning around, and I think folks are going to get to see Dean on the national programs, and I think that'll help raise his profile as well.
Yes, one thing I think could be a key ingredient of this, and this will happen if Dean puts up a big number in Michigan. There are several statewide candidates who are terrified of running with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. They're actually saying to folks, I don't think I can win if it's Joe Biden up there.
We met legislators in New Hampshire who felt that way.
Yeah. So if you have statewide or federal candidates in the Democratic Party who are given the license to raise their hands and say, hey, guys, let's go with Dean, I think they'll take that opportunity out of self-preservation if Dean can put up a big enough number in Michigan. So, and in my opinion, he does not need to win Michigan, but he just needs to put up a big number. And the historical analog is Eugene McCarthy putting up 42% in New Hampshire. So everyone can, see that parallel where if Dean were to get 42% in Michigan, I think all bets are off. And
it's pandemonium. It's he'll be the ultimate political disruptor this cycle, and really, open up the field probably for other candidates as well. I mean, it will become a full-fledged primary, I think, and that would be good for the party. And Dean has said it'd be good for the party, and I agree with him.
Yeah, so if that were to happen, I think a bunch of the Michigan delegation would actually raise their hands and be like, hey, I'm going to endorse Dean now because Dean at the top of the ticket means I have a chance, whereas Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, I don't. I mean, it's pretty direct that way. So you touched on the media blackout. Longtime fans of mine remember the MSNBC blackout of my campaign. Ariana Picari was a producer who left a little bit after the campaign and then said, I was given a list of candidates never to have on air, and you were on that list. And so that obviously pained me, but it also explained a lot. It's like, there actually is a fix-in at MSNBC in particular. They have essentially zeroed out Dean's campaign in the same way. CNN is a little bit more up the middle. They'll frankly acknowledge that Dean exists, and some people are happy to have him on and have a real convo with him. And I had that experience too, by the way. Like CNN actually was leagues better to me than MSNBC was. Unfortunately, a lot of Democratic primary voters really just use MSNBC as their main source of info. How did MSNBC treat Bernie back in the day on both campaigns?
Well, not well. I mean, look, I mean, the exception proves the rule. I think Chris Hayes was very fair with Bernie often, and a couple of others. But, by and large, it was a very hostile environment. I mean, the MSNBC, even back then, has functioned as an arm of the DNC. It's really the communication arm of the DNC. And so, I know the right says that about MSNBC, but it happens to be true. I mean, sometimes a stopped watch is right twice a day, and on this, the right is correct. So, you can expect a chilly reception if you are not totally in lockstep with whatever the establishment of the Democratic Party wants. And so that's why you had problems there, Andrew. You weren't in lockstep with everybody.
Oh, yeah, I was just a guy. And to your point, Fox is actually much more eager to have Dean on, in part because he's running against Joe Biden.
Right. Well,
you can work with.
I went on Fox many times in 2016. The only thing you have to be careful of is, sometimes their questions are laden with assumptions that you reject. And so you have to be clear, make sure you reject them before you actually answer the substance of the question, because, they're often over the top, as you know.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. We sleep more than we do just about anything else. Even if you're hardworking, you know what I mean. Why sleep on a mattress that's made for lots of people when you can sleep on a mattress that's personalized to you? Just take the quiz at Helix Sleep and get a mattress sent to you that has a 100-night trial, yup, 3 months, and a 10 to 15-year warranty. My kids seek out the Helix mattress in the house. It's their favorite one, and I gotta say, it wasn't made for them. It was made for me. Don't want to take my word for it. Helix has been awarded the #1 mattress picked by GQ and Wired magazine. It's going to make you healthier and more energetic. Do something that's actually going to improve your health. Helix is offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/yang and use code HelixPartner20. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now.
Yeah, no, it's an unfortunate dynamic, Jeff, because what happens, I'm just going to speak for myself. So you say, hey, I'd like to make the case to Democratic voters. Then MSNBC blots you out. And then you're like, all right. And then you know who will have you on Fox. But then Fox does have a particular approach to things and lens. And so it ends up pushing you in a particular direction very naturally, where, because you could express a few points, but they'll ask you about one point about, let's say, Joe Biden. And then you're like, well, I actually happen to believe this. So sure, I'll say Joe Biden, is like the wrong candidate. And,
Right.
despite the fact that I appreciate a lot of Joe Biden's accomplishments, I just don't think he's the right candidate for 24 by his own words. But this media environment is part of the disillusionment a lot of Americans feel. And I feel like you've been banging your head against this wall for longer than just about any of us.
Yeah, I mean, in New Hampshire, there was a sort of really a big example of this. There was a conference of college students from around the country, and the Democratic candidates, minus Joe Biden because he was boycotting New Hampshire, went and spoke to them. And then when the media wrote the story about it, they described it as a room of seventh graders, which the students took great offense to because they were
Sure.
college students from around the country. And it's just that kind of, minimizing and belittling of people, by the media, not really getting the facts right. I mean, on election day in New Hampshire, you'll remember that CNN was interviewing voters at the polls, and they interviewed a Haley voter, a Trump voter, and then they only could find one Democratic voter who said, this woman said she was loved Joe Biden and thought Dean was annoying. Turns out, without identifying her, that this was the head of the pro-Biden super PAC in New Hampshire, with no identification whatsoever by CNN that that's who that was. So, people see this, and
They should interview me, Jeff, and be like random
random guy,
random guy.
thinks Joe Biden's annoying, loves Dean. So much for balance, and that's just what you call color coverage. That's just talking to random voters on election day. It's not substantive coverage, but even there, you can see the incredible bias built in.
I would blame that woman who just should have identified herself and be like, look, you don't want to talk to me. I'm the freaking treasurer of the Biden Write-In campaign. Instead of like pretending, being like, oh, I'm a woman on the street. Like, I thought that was a little bit off.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pumped to be building the Dean machine with you. I think that we have a chance to change the direction of American politics on February 27th in Michigan. Anyone listening to this, if you have friends in Michigan, let them know, hey, Dean Phillips is on the ballot to save us from the Trump versus Biden rematch that none of us wants, that in our opinion, Trump will probably win. So if you'd like to have a better sense of who's in office, go meet Dean Phillips in Michigan. He'll be coming to a town near you. Tell your friends. If you're not in Michigan, send Dean's campaign a couple of bucks if you can spare them. But it's all going to come down to what happens on Feb 27. I think it's a golden opportunity. Most people looking up are like, New Hampshire, 20%. South Carolina, it's going to be very, very low in all likelihood. But Michigan is achievable. Michigan is doable. A lot of discontent with the president, a lot of desire for an alternative. Dean's a great fit. If Nikki Haley's out, the independents show up in force. They're the resources to let people know who Dean Phillips is and what he wants to do for the country. I think Dean Phillips can put up a shockingly high number in Michigan on Feb 27, and then all bets are off. Everything could change. We have to make it happen, though. And Jeff, I'm grateful to you for putting yourself back into the ring to help Dean and Zach and the team make it happen.
Yeah, well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased to be here, and I was actually very proud of what we did in New Hampshire. We held the president under 65%.
It was remarkable.
We held the president under 65%. There were about 10,000 votes for ceasefire, which took votes from us, and Nikki Haley taking all the independents. So I feel very, very good about what happened in New Hampshire. I think a lot of people were actually surprised by the performance. South Carolina was always going to be tough. The president's very popular there. He has longtime personal ties in South Carolina. He has ties with Jim Clyburn, who is the sort of political godfather of South Carolina. So that was always going to be a very tough political environment for us. But, Michigan is a totally different story. And I think we're going to really surprise folks there. But we need your help.
Yes, let's go. Dean24.com, Michigan, Feb 27. Jeff Weaver, thank you for making a difference to the entire country, Jeff, as you have over the last couple of cycles. And we're going to do it again in 24.
And to you, Andrew, you did put math back on the map, so we all appreciate you for that.
Yes, it's fixed everything. Thank you, Jeff.
Take care.